Good morning, this is Berry, and I have decided to use storytelling as my sacred practice for this month of March. And I'd like to start by telling you about Anansi. Anansi is a spider, and long ago, Anansi visited the sky god, and the sky god liked him so much that he gave Anansi, and only Anansi, the gift of storytelling so that Anansi could spin stories about life on earth. And as you know, in African tradition, storytelling is an oral tradition. And so stories do not exist until they are spoken. So thank you for joining me on my story journey. So let's go back to Anansi, whose wife was a very good cook, but always Anansi loved to taste the food that others in the village made for themselves and for their families. One day he stopped by Rabbit's house. Rabbit was his very good friend. "There are greens in your pot," cried Anansi excitedly. Anansi loved greens. "They are not quite done," said Rabbit, "but they soon will be. Stay, eat with me." "Oh, I would love to, Rabbit, but I have some things to do," Anansi said hurriedly. If he waited at Rabbit's house, Rabbit would certainly give him jobs to do. "I know," said Anansi. "I'll spin a web. I'll tie one end around my leg and one end to your pot, and when the greens are done, tug on the web and I'll come running." Rabbit thought it was a great idea, and so it was done. "I smell beans." Anansi sniffed excitedly as he ambled along. "Delicious beans cooking in a pot." Come eat our beans with us," cried the monkeys. "They are almost done." "Ooh, I would love to, Father Monkey," said Anansi, and again Anansi suggested he spin a web, with one end tied around his leg and one end tied to the big bean pot. Father Monkey thought it was a great idea, and all his children thought so too, and so it was done. "I smell sweet potatoes," Anansi sniffed happily as he ambled along. "Sweet potatoes and honey, I do believe." "Anansi," called his friend Hog, "my pot is full of sweet potatoes and honey. Come and share my food with me." "I would love to," said Anansi, and again Anansi suggested he spin a web with one end tied around his leg and one end tied to the sweet potato pot. His friend Hog thought it was a great idea, and so it was done. And by the time Anansi arrived at the river, he had one web tied to each of his 8 legs. This, thought Anansi proudly, was a wonderful idea. I wonder whose pot will be ready first. And just then Anansi felt a tug at his leg. "Ah," said Anansi, "that is the web string tied to Rabbit's greens." He felt another, and another. Anansi was pulled 3 ways at once. "Oh dear," said Anansi, as he felt the 4th web string pull, and then he felt the 5th web string tug, and the 6th and the 7th and the 8th. Anansi was pulled this way and that way as everyone pulled on the web strings at once. His legs were pulled thinner and thinner. Anansi rolled and tugged himself into the river. When all the webs were washed away, Anansi pulled himself painfully up on the shore. "Oh my," sighed Anansi. "Perhaps that was not such a good idea after all." And to this day, Anansi the Spider has 8 very thin legs and an even thinner waist, and he never got any food that day at all.